Plan. The United States federal government should substantially increase fiscal redistribution in the United States by adopting a federal jobs guarantee through the Green New Deal. Next, contention 1 is inherency. The U.S. is falling behind. Drastic action is needed to lower carbon emissions and prevent a climate crisis. Cohen, 2023. The sectors that make up 2/3 of total U.S. emissions saw an increase in emissions. The U.S. continues to fall behind in its climate targets. The Inflation Reduction Act passed last year might not be enough. More aggressive policies are needed. And contention 2 is solvency. The Green New Deal will reduce U.S. emissions to net zero by 2030 by investing in renewable energy and creating millions of jobs. D'Souza, 2022. The U.S. must lead the way because of its technological advancement and historical contribution to emissions. The main goal is to bring U.S. emissions down to net zero and meet 100% of power demand and the creation of millions of jobs. These goals are to be accomplished through funding to help communities affected by climate change, investing in renewable power sources, investing in industry to spur growth in clean energy, restoring ecosystems, and working with the international community. And the advantage is climate. First, we are running out of time to stop climate change. Only an immediate transition to renewable energy can save the planet for future generations. Rice and Pulver, 2023. Climate change threatens ecosystems and the well-being of current and future generations. Our world needs climate action. We can still secure a livable and sustainable future for all. The science is clear. We must take immediate action to phase out fossil fuels. Wind, solar, and energy efficiency are the keys. And second, the plan solves. By taxing emissions, the Green New Deal would increase the cost of fossil fuels, creating an incentive to transition to renewable energy. Brown and Amati, 2019. A cleaner energy approach motivated by carbon taxes would promote innovation, open up new markets, and produce a greener economy. Raising energy prices would empower the transition to renewables. A low-carbon economy is likely to be a stronger and more secure economy that also provides climate solutions. And third, the U.S. is key to global action on climate change. The Green New Deal will restore U.S. climate leadership and pressure other countries to reduce emissions. Hultman and Gross, 2021. 4 years of U.S. absence from the global climate community have left a big gap in international leadership and credibility. Net zero emissions from the largest emitting countries by mid-century is necessary. U.S. actions can either dampen or accelerate global action. If the U.S. fails to make commitments that the rest of the world views as serious, it will be harder to pressure other countries to take more serious action. The U.S. must advance a credible strategy for robust and continued climate action at home. Thank you. I now stand ready for cross-examination. Yeah.
All right, starting now. Let's start on your rice and pulver card. So you said the U.S. needs to curb emissions to avoid increasing the global temperature by 1.5 degrees, right?
Yeah.
Great. So where in the rice and pulver card does it say when this will happen without the plan?
So I'm not sure it specifically gives a time frame in the rice and pulver card, but this evidence is from hundreds of scientists, and it's the latest science, and it calls for immediate action. And throughout our evidence, our other cards cite the year 2030 as the point of no return.
Sure, so the rice and pulver card doesn't have a time frame. Great. So the impact to the advantage is restoring U.S. leadership, right? Correct?
Yes.
All right, can you explain the warrant for restoring U.S. leadership in your Hultman and Gross card if other countries have already began pledging ambitious climate targets?
Yeah, so by taking meaningful action on climate change, the U.S. will be able to exert more pressure on other countries that aren't already taking such measures and countries that aren't meeting their targets, which means that those countries would no longer be able to point to the U.S. and model our inaction, both now and in the future.
Okay, sure. And then lastly, for the Hultman card was written at the beginning of the Biden presidency as a call to action for the administration to begin rolling back climate change. So now as we near the end of his presidency, there's been no comprehensive policy that the card is advocating for. So how will the U.S. establish credibility now
Yeah, so the huge effect of the Green New Deal on climate, and also the previous smaller Biden administration victories on climate, like rejoining the Paris Accords and the investment in the IRA, those would be enough to establish credibility. And the Green New Deal, unlike those previous policies, the Green New Deal is major, not subject to reversals, and would be perceived by the global community as a return to being the hegemon.
Is that warrant in the Holman card?
I'm not sure about that.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much.
Okay, we're going to start on the disadvantage, and then we're going to move on to the case. On the disadvantage, first is uniqueness. Energy prices are declining now. U.S. natural gas production is at a record high. Newman 614. Natural gas prices have pushed U.S. production to new record highs. A glut now seems to be forming, with prices falling even lower. Gas prices are headed toward new record lows. And second is the link. The plan's shift to renewable energy will cost trillions of dollars. Low-income, minority, and rural Americans won't be able to keep the lights on. Holly, 2019. The Green New Deal will cost $16.3 trillion. It fails to address a real and urgent problem, energy poverty. Low-income families and individuals can't afford basic heating and electric needs due to high energy prices, and it disproportionately impacts minority, low-income, and rural communities the most. And third is the impact, global energy poverty. U.S. natural gas exports reduce emissions and help grow the economy. The plan's shift away from fossil fuels will trap billions in poverty. Holly, 2019. Natural gas is the future in U.S. and global energy production. Since 1970, America has reduced the 6 key harmful pollutants by 73%, while still growing our GDP by 262%. Through our leadership in energy production and environmental protection, the United States is in a position to help lift billions in developing nations out of poverty and sickness by exporting our natural resources, along with pollution control technology. With that abundance, we can promote human health, combat energy poverty, and improve the quality of life for all people regardless of where they live. Now, on to the climate advantage. First, the affirmative has no guarantee for how they will reach net zero in such a short amount of time. Either they tax fossil fuels so heavily they will throw the economy into disarray, or the plan will not be aggressive enough to solve. And second, the status quo solves. The U.S. is already taking action on climate. 22. The Inflation Reduction Act represents the single largest investment in climate action in U.S. history and will profoundly alter the international landscape. This will spur a race to the top in the clean energy economy and restore trust and legitimacy for the United States within the global climate community. And third, the U.S. isn't key. Other countries' emissions outweigh. International Energy Agency 22. Between 2019 and 2021, China more than offset the aggregate decline in the rest of the world over the same period. In 2021, China's CO2 emissions rose above 11.9 billion tons, accounting for 33% of the global total. And I'm ready for
now. So in your Holly 19 impact card, which 6 pollutants has America reduced since 1970?
The Holly card is summarizing some research, so it doesn't list out which specific pollutants, but it does say that they are the key 6 pollutants that the U.S. has been combating.
Okay, so in the Holly 19 card, can you explain the warrant?
What do you mean? First, which Holly 19 card?
The impact card.
In the impact card, it says that currently natural gas is extremely cheap because the U.S. is producing so much of it. And not only is that making energy to heat homes and drive cars more affordable in the U.S., it's also exported to other countries at that low rate. So other countries that have been struggling with poverty for years are able to obtain this natural gas at a low cost, which helps them fuel their industry and develop more of their own technology so that they can pursue, 1, lifting populations out of poverty, and 2, developing new green technologies along the way.
Mm-hmm. So your argument is that in the status quo, there are currently, the U.S. is currently helping these undeveloped countries be lift out of poverty, correct?
Yes.
Okay, that's it.
Okay.
Is falling behind on the climate crisis. It won't meet its Paris Agreement goals, and drastic action is necessary. That's Cohen 23. The plan solves. The Green New Deal guarantees investment in clean, renewable energy and creates millions of high-paying green jobs. That's D'Souza 22. Its carbon tax also incentivizes the transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy. That's Brown and Abney 19. Our case outweighs the disadvantage on magnitude. Without the app, the world is facing an existential crisis. Everyone dying is worse than the disadvantages impact of energy poverty. And the climate emergency risks a global catastrophe. Roberts 2019. We are deep in a climate emergency. If we go into a runaway climate effect, the damage may be between 100 trillion euros and the loss of civilization. If we don't solve the climate crisis, we can forget about the rest. Now, onto the line by line. First, they say that the plan can't reach net zero without ruining the economy. But the Green New Deal makes this possible through things like investing in renewable energy and creating millions of jobs. That's our D'Souza 22 evidence. The carbon tax will be aggressive, but that's to force businesses to transition to renewable energy. That's our Brown and Abney 19 evidence. Next, they say the status quo solves because the US is already acting on climate change. But first, the Inflation Reduction Act alone won't be enough. More aggressive policies are needed. That's Cohen 23, which takes the IRA into consideration. And second, their Cohen 22 card says that the IRA includes several harmful provisions on drilling. This will contribute to already high emissions in the US. Next, they say that the US isn't key because emissions of other countries outweigh. But first, US climate change leadership can accelerate global action because it allows us to pressure other countries into taking action. That's Tillman and Gross 21. And second, US emissions are key. The best research proves the plan solves. Millman 2022. The US has inflicted more than $1.9 trillion in damage to other countries from its emissions. The US, the largest historical emitter, has caused harm to other countries. This puts the US ahead of China. Rich nations in North America have done the most to fuel climate change. Now, moving on to the energy disadvantage. First, the Green New Deal will create millions of jobs and jumpstart the economy. Carter 2021. The Green New Deal could create 10.6 million new green jobs, expand job training, and revitalize the role of unions. Sweeping legislation could put millions of people to work with fair wages and jumpstart a post-pandemic economy to lift people out of poverty. And Natural gas is not climate friendly. It's a key source of methane, which is a huge cause of climate change. RADCA 2023. Emissions of methane, the main constituent of natural gas, mean natural gas isn't climate friendly. Researchers have discovered massive amounts of methane leaking from natural gas facilities around the world. Methane is 84 times more potent than carbon dioxide, so any emissions undermine its credentials as a better fossil fuel. I now stand ready for cross-examination.
All right. Sorry, my brain suddenly froze. Okay, I'm good. So first, your REDCA evidence talks about methane in natural gas, but how much methane is actually in natural gas?
Our card doesn't give a specific amount of methane that's in it, but it does say that it is 84 times more potent than carbon dioxide, so any amount of extra methane emission is horrible for climate change.
So natural gas could just be emitting like a tiny sliver of methane, whereas coal or other types of fuel emit tons of carbon dioxide, and that would still make natural gas worse?
We would say natural gas is still worse because even though our RADCA card doesn't give a number, it does say that the researchers discovered massive amounts of methane, not a tiny sliver.
Okay, your Millman 22 evidence says that emissions are U.S. emissions are key, but it also says that in the text of the card that other countries like China are currently the leaders in world emissions. So how will just U.S. emissions changing alter the path that these other countries are on?
There are two things that we would say to this. The first is that even though other countries might currently be ahead, the U.S. is still the largest historical emitter. And also that not the Millman card, but our Tillman and Gross evidence from the 1AC also answers this because it says that restoring U.S. credibility on climate change would allow us to pressure other countries into taking more action. So even if other countries like China are ahead of the U.S., if we are able to restore our credibility, that means that countries around the globe will all do better on climate change.
Right, but what evidence do you have that U.S. credibility would specifically impact the world's largest emitters like China and India, beyond just vague platitudes about the U.S. being able to show an example to other countries?
Again, that would be our Tillman and Gross evidence from the 1AC, which says that specifically why we haven't seen action so far is our lack of credibility.
Okay.
All right. I'm going to take some time now. Is going to be on the DA. Start with an overview and then moving on to the line by line. Awesome. Is anybody not ready? All right, I'll begin. Starting on impact calculus, the DA turns the case. Our impact card argues that implementing the plan prevents developing countries from accessing cheap energy they need to transition to a greener economy that exists now. That's Newman 23 and Holly 19. This traps those countries in poverty and accelerates global warming, giving us less time to find a solution to climate change. Vote neg because this DA outweighs their case. First, on risk. Our Holly evidence is very explicit. It explains that the plan will directly cause harm to those below the poverty line as soon as it passes. The affirmative's only response to this not happening is the potential chance of job creation. The likelihood of the neg's impacts happening is guaranteed, whereas the impact of reducing emissions is very unlikely. Even if you believe that the impact of the act is greater, the risk of its implementation will force developing countries to use coal, and worsening the effects of climate change means that the neg outweighs. Second, on time frame. Global warming needs to be solved soon, but the plan shortens the time we have to solve the issue. Only by allowing cheap gas to exist now can developing countries develop greener technology later. Since the increased use of fossil fuels in the developing world happens before the world can go net zero in emissions, the next impact will happen sooner. They don't read any evidence on when climate change will be too late, but we give you a specific time for when countries will have to switch to worse pollutants. Now, onto the line by line. First, they say that the Green New Deal will create millions of jobs, but nowhere in their evidence does it guarantee that this will happen. And status quo energy leads to low prices and declining emissions. The plan trades off with natural gas and risks trapping millions in energy poverty. Holiday 19, the Green New Deal would cost $600,000 per household and eliminate the use of all fossil fuels. It would result in higher energy prices for all Americans, but would disproportionately hurt people of color and other minorities who are most susceptible to energy poverty. Energy poverty occurs when households are unable to afford their basic electric and heating needs due to high energy prices. Unrealistic proposals only contribute to energy poverty and won't work for low-income families. There's simply no excuse for forcing low-income African Americans and other minorities to choose between heating a home and putting food on the table. There is a practical, realistic path forward when it comes to improving energy efficiency and lowering greenhouse gas emissions. But the Green New Deal, with $93 trillion price tag, isn't any viable plan at all. It's a pipe dream and a bad deal for America. Next. Second, they say that natural gas is not climate friendly and causes climate change. However, we say, turn. Natural gas is a key bridge fuel that reduces emissions while we develop effective renewable energy. Rapier 2018. In the year 2000, 71% of the US electricity generation was derived from fossil fuels. By 2017, the share had fallen to 63%. The decline is entirely because of a move away from coal. Natural gas took most of coal's market share. Natural gas is now the largest source of power in the US. The impact of the huge drop in coal can be clearly seen in the emissions data. When natural gas is burned, it produces fewer carbon dioxide emissions. The US has reduced carbon dioxide emissions by 639 million metric tons per year since 2000. This leads all countries, by far, in reducing carbon dioxide emissions. Natural gas should be a bridge between a coal-fired past and a renewable future, and it's already serving as that bridge. I now stand ready for cross.
Everybody ready? Okay, so if natural gas is supposed to be a bridge to help us transition to renewables, and the plan has the goal of speeding up that transition to renewables, why is that bad?
Yeah, so we tell you that as soon as you implement the plan and make it a lot more expensive to export any type of emitter, what happens is that the developing world suffers because they can no longer pay the cheaper price, which means that they then have to start switching to more harmful pollutants as well.
Okay, well, if the carbon tax will increase the cost of all fossil fuels and not just natural gas, why will other countries switch to them?
Absolutely, right? So it only increases the cost with US exports. The reason why they're even using natural gas right now is because the United States provides it at a cheap price. But as soon as that becomes non-existent, they're going to start switching to the cheaper version of coal, which will already mean it'll be worse for the environment.
Okay, so if price is the big determinant of whether or not people transition, why will we ever see this transition to renewables if we keep natural gas cheap?
Absolutely, right? The Rapier evidence does a really good job at following this analysis, right? We saw that coal made up a large market share of the energy that the United States used. But because it started having natural gas become more available at a cheaper price than coal, companies started switching. The advocacy of the NEG is saying that we should be doing the exact same thing with renewable energy rather than artificially making it so that everyone has to then switch, because then that's what triggers the switch back to coal.
Okay, so are there any specific lines in your evidence that say how quick this transition would be if we just stick to the status quo?
The idea here is it gives you the time frame of the transition between coal and natural gas. So we're trying to use that again to show that natural gas could also be used as a bridge fuel 17 years in the future, right? That's what the Rapier evidence says.
Thank you, that's about time. Okay. With my reading process, you're speaking too fast.
Am I?
Yes.
Do you want to do it right now?
Yeah, I'm good with that.
Sure.
All right, yeah. Okay, so no, to Anui, when you're looking at this, second process is the one we're using. Okay. Is everybody ready for process?
Whenever you're ready.
All right. So if natural gas is a bridge to renewables, why is the plan speeding up that transition bad?
Yeah. So we're saying that as soon as you speed up the transition, it harms the developing world because the export prices that they're currently getting will increase as well, meaning that they then have to switch to harmful pollutants like coal.
Okay, thank you. But if the carbon tax will increase the cost of all fossil fuels and not just natural gas, why will other countries switch to them?
Absolutely, right? Because what happens is that they will stop trading with the United States and start outsourcing to cheaper alternatives that happen with different countries who don't pass the Green New Deal. Since your plan only covers the United States, it doesn't ensure that other countries are for sure going to follow suit, meaning that most likely the developing world will try to find cheaper alternatives like coal and start emitting those at a higher frequency.
Okay, thank you. So if the price of energy is the big factor in the transition, when in the status quo, if we don't pass the plan, will people actually make this transition from natural gas to renewable energy?
While we don't have a specific analysis on that, our Rapier evidence cross-examines like historical analysis of coal, right? It showed that in the year 2000, 71% of electricity generation was derived from fossil fuels, but then 63% had decreased by the year 2017, showing that currently there is a gap and a time frame for when we'll switch from gas to another bridge fuel as well, and we're saying that renewable could be that next bridge fuel.
All right, thank you.
Absolutely.
All right, everybody ready for the one and up? Okay, we'll be just handling the case. Is everyone good? All right. First, they say the plan provides a specific action plan to reach net zero, but the D'Souza evidence just makes assertions. There are still no warrants or data for how the AF would get companies and other actors on board with the plan. And on the status quo solves, they say the Inflation Reduction Act won't be enough, but their Cohen evidence does suggest that the IRA is seen as a green and aggressive policy. While it won't be as fast acting as the plan, it is a more sustainable plan in the long run and less risky to the environment, while still signaling to other countries that we are working to stop climate change. That's Cohen. And they say the IRA includes provisions on drilling, but these are provisions for natural gas, which is less damaging to the environment overall and a bridge fuel, as my partner said in his last speech. That's Rapier from the dissat arguments. And they say the US is key, but two arguments. First, if climate change leadership is enough to get buy-in from the rest of the world, the IRA should already have signaled that by being the most significant piece of climate legislation in history, according to Colin 22. And that's including a history that has the EPA in it. Second, they say the US is ahead in emissions, but this is an overall historical estimate, as they said in Cross-Ex. Currently, China and India are bypassing us in emissions. That's our IEA evidence. Even if we get better in emissions, we won't be able to solve climate change without even more significant action from these other world powers, which we won't get. All right.
I'm going to take prep. So first, I'm going to be going on case with an overview and line by line, and then I'll go on to the dissent. Is anyone not ready? All right, climate change is the single greatest threat to life on Earth, and the Green New Deal is our best shot at a solution by reducing U.S. emissions to net zero by 2030, as outlined by D'Souza. The case outweighs on magnitude. Our Roberts 19 card explicitly says that climate change could lead to the loss of civilization. Energy poverty is a serious issue, but it isn't irreversible, and we have time to solve it. Our impact outweighs. Onto line by line. On inherency. First, they say no specific explanation for reaching net zero, but D'Souza lays out several specific actions by the federal government to reach net zero, like investing in renewable power sources. Next, group their arguments about the IRA solving for climate change and restoring U.S. leadership. First, the IRA isn't even an environmental bill and will only cut carbon emissions 40% by 2030. That's too little too late. And our Cohen evidence already accounts for this legislation. If the IRA were enough, we would already be seeing meaningful global action, which we aren't. Next, they say China and India outweigh U.S. emissions, but U.S. leadership will spark change from other countries globally, including China and India. That's Holtman and Gross. Now, on to the dissad. No term. Extend our Radka 23 card, which says that natural gas emits massive amounts of methane, which is terrible for the climate. This means that if we don't pass the plan, climate change is inevitable, leading to extinction. And the decline in emissions outlined by Rapier is short-lived and is a function of a decrease in coal, not an increase in natural gas. And there is no guarantee that there will ever be a transition to renewables without the plan. Natural gas is either a bridge to our Green New Deal or to a future devastated by climate change. Vote aye.
I'm gonna take some prep time. Alright, cool. Alright, I'm going to start on the DA with an overview and then the line by line, and then I'm going to be going on case. Alright, is anybody not ready? Awesome. Starting with an overview. If you vote for AF, you're condemning everyone to die of climate change, but faster and more miserable. The neg has proven that the DA turns the case. Our impact card has proven that the implementation of the plan prevents countries from utilizing the cheap gas that exists now. That's Newman. As a result, this will increase the cost of natural gas exports to the developing world, forcing them to switch back to cheaper and more disastrous emissions. That's Holly. And the most important factor in this debate is time frame. Time frame is more important than magnitude because if our impact happens first, it makes theirs inevitable. The neg has proven that the switch to coal in the developing world happens quicker than the broad development and deployment of their miracle green technology and destroys any chance of solving global warming. Vote neg because we keep on the path we are, we can solve global warming and allow the rest of the world to transition to green tech with us. On to the line by line. They say that the Radka card proves that the natural gas is bad for the environment. First, our Rapier evidence explains that even if it isn't great for the environment, it is a necessary bridge fuel for the developing world. Only when you vote neg do you allow for the developing world to adapt naturally rather than trapping billions in poverty. And two, natural gas is still net better fuel than other alternatives like coal. As long as this is true, you should vote neg because we don't force countries to revert back to these cheaper, dirtier fossil fuels. Now, going on to the case. They say that the Inflation Reduction Act is not enough to solve for U.S. emissions. We say the U.S. is solving now. The Inflation Reduction Act has already signaled to the rest of the world our willingness to work towards green energy and does start transitioning to a sustainable future. That's Coleman. Next, they say that the plan signals to other countries, but other countries stopped the GND from solving climate change alone. They will continue to complete faster rate than the US, meaning that this takes out their solvency. We can't solve it without them. Thank you.
Anyone who's curious, the area of my heart is not much bigger. Maybe it's just this one.
I destroyed all the goodwill when I was in high school here. Me and all the other children at the end.
Tragedy. It was all your fault playing Vigario. That's
Yeah.
why we can't have nice things.
Yes.
What are you trying to do?
Play Slitherio.
But you can't do that on every one.
Not
You
on
did
this
back in
one.
my day.
Oh, the guess one.
But also, they put us on a different network back in the day. They put us on MRM Logan or EDU or whatever it was. Yeah, they gave us a temporary login.
Oh, so you have a fancy platform,
Yeah.
which is still
We gave everyone a password.
I think I.
Transition card time.
Mhm.
All right, for the 2AR, I'm going to start on the climate advantage with an overview and then go to the disadvantage. Is anyone not ready? All right. Drastic action is necessary for the U.S. to address climate change. That's Cohen 23. The plan will solve through things like investing in renewable energy and creating green jobs. That's D'Souza 22. An immediate transition to renewables is crucial to fight climate change. That's Rice and Pulver 23. The Green New Deal's carbon tax will incentivize this transition. That's Brown and Amati 19. The plan will restore the U.S.'s climate leadership, which will allow us to pressure other countries into taking action. That's Holtman and Gross 21. The case outweighs on magnitude. Climate change is an existential threat. Even though energy poverty is bad, there's nothing worse than extinction. If we win that we outweigh on magnitude, you should vote aft to stop climate change, even if you think the plan will also trigger the energy disadvantage. Now onto the line by line. First, they say the status quo solves, but first, even with the Inflation Reduction Act, drastic action is still needed. That's Cohen 23. And second, the IRA is worse for climate change because it includes provisions for drilling for dirty fuels. That's in their Cohen 22 card. Next, they say other countries' emissions outweigh, but US climate leadership allows us to pressure other countries like India and China into taking action. That's Holtman and Gross 21. Now onto the disadvantage. We're just going to extend that natural gas is horrible for climate change and can't serve as a bridge fuel, meaning the disadvantage does not turn the case. Natural gas is not better than any of the alternatives highlighted by the 2NR. Scientists recently discovered that it contains huge amounts of methane, which make it worse than previously assumed. That's our RADCA 23 evidence, which is preferable to the negative's outdated Rate Year 18 card. Thank you. All right. Good debate, y'all.
Good debate.
Hey.
Good debate.
With fist bump.